Okay, so my name's Joshua Davis. I live in New York City. I work at a studio called Rosa. We're about 44 people, and there I am the media arts director. So basically my role is addressing content that lives in a physical space using screens, hardware, software. So I write a lot of software that interfaces with hardware.
What kind of design would you say you're in, and how would you define that field?
Yeah, so I would say that the kind of design I'm doing is experiential. So I'm very much interested in this idea of, well, let me back up. You know, if you look at the landscape of art in a museum, you know, it's thousands of years of don't touch. You know, this is a painting, it's really old, please don't touch it. And I think what we're finding now is with the kind of spatial design, physical interaction design, you know, the work that I'm creating relies on people. So I may install something in a room that uses projection or LED and has some kind of hardware and software reacting to that hardware, but really the content doesn't exist unless there are participants, you know. So there is some kind of interaction between someone interacting with some kind of device that then produces the results. So, you know, in my case, the art doesn't exist without the participant. So what's that called? I have no clue. Let's go with that.
Okay, so what's the purpose of experiential design in either business or life in general?
Well, so I think me as an independent image maker, again, just like I talked about earlier, like I like this idea of, you know, creating artwork that requires a person in order for it to exist, right? Now, what we're seeing, if we switch over to advertising, right, and traditional graphic design and the work that we're doing in the studio, it really is a new way for a lot of the brands that we interact with to create experiences that people are talking about. You know, it's not a TV commercial that's sitting on television that's very passive, and it's not a website that's usually very passive. Usually this is some kind of experience for a brand that you're participating in the creation of that content for the brand. So, you know, especially in the United States, we're seeing more brands use this kind of tactic to engage people who support or love the brand. You know, whether that be somebody like Nike, you know, Nike's always looking for ways like, how do we remain cool? And so a lot of the work that we're making really engages the people who love the brand, and it creates these kind of events of spectacle, you know, things that they go, oh my fucking God, you know, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
There you go.
It's gonna happen. So I see it as definitely this new way of brands are using this to really capture the imagination of people who are either fans of the brand or are going to remember it because of this spectacle that they've experienced.
And by the way, you can swear at them.
Okay.
No one cares.
Well, yeah, somebody earlier was like, he was like, shit. He's like, can I say that? So, you know.
How has the digital revolution changed your work?
Massive. You know, when I first got into doing graphic design, you know, I didn't. Well, let's just say, you know, I've been doing this for 18 or 19 years. And when I first got on doing graphic design, I just thought, well, okay, I'm going to make work, and that work is going to be very specific to the location where I'm embedded. You know, I think earlier when I was a painter, I just thought, oh, you know, I'll show work at my local coffee shop, and then maybe I'll get into some kind of gallery. And so it was 1994 when I started using the internet. And it's actually how I got turned on to programming was learning how to code JavaScript and HTML for Netscape 2. And it was at that point that I realized that my audience was global. So as more countries and more of the planet got on the internet, I was no longer isolated to this one location. You know, I would have people who would be seeing my work, you know, halfway across the world. So I think that's kind of the biggest advantage is having a global audience. Like working in the digital medium certainly meant that I could live anywhere and anywhere, anybody could consume the content anywhere in the world as long as they had a computer and internet access. So I think that's, for me, was the biggest advantage was gaining a global audience rather than a very specific local audience.
Do you consider yourself a digitalist?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I have these kind of go-to things that I always say, like, people will say, oh, I just bought a book, and I'll say, oh, what's a book? So I'm very much a futurist, like I believe that books are dead, and I think TV's dead, and I think all these sort of traditional mediums in which we expressed ourselves in the past are kind of dying mediums. So yeah, I'm definitely a digitalist, a futurist. I'm always on to whatever's the next newest way of expressing myself. And right now it's been hardware, for the past year and a half. Hardware has really revolutionized sort of the content that I've been making. Like as an example, look at the Kinect. The Kinect is a $150 device that I can use to make art. And if you actually look at the history of depth sensors and actually capturing three-dimensional content in a room, if you go 10 years prior to when the Kinect was first released onto the market, if you go back 10 years, that technology was actually a $1 million endeavor. Being able to scan people in a room, that was a $1 million technology. 10 years later, it's a 150 device that every kid has in their living room. So certainly hardware has really revolutionized how I'm expressing myself over the past couple of years.
If you could change one thing about design and how it's done, what would it be?
Oh yeah, that question doesn't pertain to me. I don't even know if I care or even really think about those kind of things. I have no opinion.
How about art?
Well, I think people should stop painting. I think painting is stupid. It's been done. Everything's been done. And I think maybe, I piss people off by saying that, but there's so much. Let me give you an example. My first computer was a Commodore 64. And if you had in one side the Commodore 64 when it first came out, and over here you had a piece of paper and a pencil, there were things that I could draw on the paper that far surpassed the Commodore 64. It was a very rudimentary system. But now, if you look at technology today, there are things that we can do with computers that far surpass the human hand. There are things that I can generate in code that would take me a lifetime, or I would even dare say impossible if I had to generate by hand. So I think in terms of the art world, I'm definitely a futurist in the sense that, I don't think people should paint anymore. I think it's already been done and there's nothing new that can really happen there. So if that can push more people into learning maybe how to program or learning how to work with electronics or hardware, then cool, I'll keep saying those statements in the hopes that more artists will adopt kind of what's happening right now. So stop painting.
How has the landscape changed for artists with the internet and, for example, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and crowdfunding sites like that?
Yeah, so I mean, I have friends that use Kickstarter, and I think like the perfect example I would say is back in 2001, I actually published a book on programming this certain language, and I think I sold 17,000. I sold out of my book. It was 17,000 copies, and I think when everything was done and said, my royalty check, I think, was $5,000, And so, but now we're looking at people who have ideas and realize that they don't need a publishing company to actually execute those ideas. So they can use things like Kickstarter to say, let me 100% fund this and have creative control. And I think that's nothing but a good thing. So I think if we can put more decision making into the hands of the people who are actually creating the content, rather than some marketing person at a publishing company saying, oh, we have to do things this way because that's how we've done it for 50 years, I think it's crap. So I think those kind of platforms have really enabled image makers like me to have more control over the content that we produce, and I think it also rewards financially so that I can keep doing these kind of things. Whereas that one book that I published, it was the last book I published because there was no incentive for me to keep creating this kind of content. So yeah, I think it's really revolutionized how we are able to put out work for public consumption and still make some kind of money and as well as have creative control. So it's good.
Do you think artists know how to market their work?
No, not everybody. But here's a great example. I have a really good friend of mine who's a comic book artist named David Mack, and he just did a series of new drawings that are amazing. And he set up a Kickstarter with a friend of his. I said, okay, I know how to do all this stuff. I'll help you set it up. So Dave could really just focus on making the drawings, and he had somebody else kind of help him set up and market and publish all that stuff on social media. But again, even with having that person help him, David still has all of the control and all of the creative freedom to do what he initially intended without somebody going, oh yeah, we shouldn't do 250 drawings, we should only do 200 because doing 250 would cost more in printing. And so what he did is when he did the Kickstarter, he initially started out was going to be a smaller book, and his Kickstarter ended up making so much money, he ended up making a bigger book. So he was able to offer more features to guys like me who want to consume his stuff in a format that's more true to what David would hope that the fans would get. So it's all good. That's it.
Thanks for your time.
Let's party.
That's right.
Right on. Cool.